Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you. My name is Michael. I'm here to introduce Alex. I quickly want to thank all of you on behalf of the OWASP Seattle chapter as well as WiCyS for Western Washington. We're very excited to have Alex from TCM here talk about practical web applications. So, Alex, over to you. Good luck.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction. Let's just jump straight in. I think I have a presentation prepared and everything else, so let me pull this over and start this up. And first things first, I apologize. If you hear some background noise, things crashing, I've kicked my cats out of the office and they are always trying to break in. So, if you hear sounds like that, it can sound like a car crash sometimes. That's just them trashing my house. So you're all good. But yeah, let's dive into today's session and let's start with the obligatory "Who am I?" slides. So my name is Alex. I have a background in application security and pen testing. I started my career as a developer, so I actually only was a developer for a year, and this was about 9 or 10 years ago now, and then transitioned into the cybersecurity field, worked for a number of different companies, so the British Police Force, as fintech company. I was living out in Tokyo, working for Rakuten for quite a while, and now I'm here at TCM Security. So I get to do what I like to do, which is teaching mostly, and kind of creating content and doing live streams and things like that. So living the dream, really, which is awesome. And big shout out to WiCyS and OWASP Seattle, of course, for organizing this and getting everything together, because it's quite a lot of work to organize an event like this. If you didn't know, I regularly go to the OWASP London, UK London chapter meetups. So if you're ever around, you can look around. You'll see me somewhere. I'm reasonably tall, so easy to spot. All right, so for today's agenda, I've got like a few slides just to kind of like put everything together. We're going to look at what is web app pen testing, what's the point, what is modern testing like now that we have bug bounty and shift left and AppSec and automation and DevSecOps and all of these amazing tools and amazing things. What does pen testing look like, and is it still necessary? Which I think it is, but I think that pen testing has changed a little bit over the last 10 years. And so we're going to look at that to kind of like frame everything. And if you're interested in becoming a web app pen tester or an AppSec engineer, or if you're interested in doing secure code review and things like that, hopefully this will give you some structure. And then we're going to do some labs. And these labs are built to be accessible to everybody. So as long as you have a web browser, you'll be able to jump in and do the labs. I was a bit worried. I thought we could do some Burp Suite and some cool stuff, but I thought with 800 people signed up, maybe troubleshooting 800 people's Burp Suite and proxy is not a good idea. So we've got some labs. We're going to mostly focus on injection attacks and access control issues, as injection attacks are kind of like a fundamental technique and apply to many vulnerabilities. And access control is a ever-increasing issue, especially with the increase of like microservices and other design or architectural patterns. And then part 3, we'll have like a how to kickstart your web app pen test career and Q&A. So if you have questions, throw them into the chat. I am like periodically checking the chats. I'm not staring at it the whole time, so apologies. I'll probably miss quite a few questions. But if you do have a question, throw it in there and I will try and get to them. If we get to like a section like the Q&A, I haven't answered your question, then repost it in the Q&A section and I will see it. Try not to repost it like 10, 20 times because YouTube will time you out. But if I don't get it as we go along, I'll do my best to pick it up at the end. And yeah, so this is a, let's answer this one quickly. Yeah, you can access all the labs through the browser. So you don't need any special setup. Ideally, Chrome or Firefox, because that's all I've tested. I haven't tested other browsers. Edge might be a bit funny, because Edge is always funny. And just a heads up, if you're connected like at work or something like that, if you have a local firewall, like some Palo Altos or something, they might intercept some of your payloads and give you some funny responses. So if you can, switch to the guest Wi-Fi, because usually organizations don't protect their guest Wi-Fi. So that's if you're in the office, that's your best bet. All right, let's dive into the introductions and get all this out of the way so that we can then do labs, basically. So web app pen testing, what is the objective of a web app pen test? And there are kind of like a couple of main ones. So identifying vulnerabilities, of course, within the application, and also identifying weaknesses within the application. And some people, whenever I see pen test reports, whether it's from colleagues or people that I've worked with or people that I've previously mentored, or sometimes now the exams we have, there is some confusion between what is a vulnerability and what is a weakness. And a vulnerability is a specific flaw that can be exploited. If you can't exploit it, if there's no impact, it's not a vulnerability. And we'll see this in our labs today, where we'll find something and there's no impact. So it's not necessarily a vulnerability, but it is a weakness. And so we can use weakness as like a broader term to look at deficiencies within an application, or maybe there's something odd about the design or implementation. And I think error messages that don't lead to anything. So for example, or like verbose error messages are a good example of a weakness. Occasionally, an error message when you have injection, which gives you a full stack trace, might leak a secret, and then you can use that to like forge tokens or carry on the attack. I think that's a vulnerability, but something that is just a bit odd that may lead to something in the future is a weakness. And then, of course, we want to evaluate security controls. This is a big part of pen testing, and this is where I spend a lot of my time. And I will share with you my general methodology for pen testing as well, kind of like the things that I prioritize and the things that I do and don't do, or things that I like to do and things that I don't bother with. And then we need an actionable report. So, and the remediation recommendations are really important. But today, actually, after the labs, we're going to go through the remediation, but we're not just going to be like, oh, change this line of code to this. We actually want to think on a more holistic view. So I don't think it's very useful to be like, use input sanitization or use filtering to stop a vulnerability. I think nowadays we need to be thinking about what is the root cause? Why is this vulnerability there? Is it lack of training? Is it security culture? Is somebody not responsible for, are we not doing code review? Do we not have SaaS tools? Do we not have DAS tools? Are things reaching build too quickly without proper review and things like that? And so we need to think more strategically, I think, about security these days and not just fix individual issues, because as an engineer, you don't want to be fighting fires. You want to be like steering the ship, if that makes sense. So that'll be a cool little section. And the development lifecycle and pen testing, traditional approaches to pen testing is once you are ready to release your application, or if you do a major update to your application, or if a regulation tells you to, then you do a pen test. That's like the traditional approach. Now, modern development is obviously much, much faster, and we're seeing more shift left and more automation. So the traditional pen test approach, whilst still is somewhat useful, I think it's becoming less useful, and I think we need to change our model a little bit in terms of what we're looking for and what we're doing. And you might be thinking like a few things here. So like maybe we can just continue with quarterly testing or yearly pen tests, or maybe even we don't need pen testing at all. But I think the reality is that the methodology just needs to change, or our focus needs to change a little bit. Before, we were focused on finding everything and covering the entire scope of an application, but now we're automating a lot and spending a lot of time finding issues that actually matter, high impact issues or critical issues that impact our users, rather than just like code execution, because getting code execution in modern web apps is actually quite difficult. depending on who built the application, but generally, yes, we don't see much like command injection these days. But most of my time is spent looking at application logic and areas where scanners don't find issues. So for example, a scanner doesn't really have a context of a user should or shouldn't be able to do this. So what I can test, should a user be able to do this, and apply the context of the application and what was intended by the engineers, and is that being enforced, for example. All right, so we also have the rise of bug bounty. A question I get almost every week is about bug bounty, and we won't talk too much about bug bounty today, but we should do it justice and not leave it out completely. But we also have shift left, and in my opinion, we kind of have four major areas of AppSec, or at least four major career paths that I can see. So one of them, of course, is pen testing. Bug bounty, I think now is a legit career path. A lot of people are doing it full time, and it's some people find it sustainable. We have AppSec engineering, which I'm kind of using as an umbrella term for everything like DevSecOps and security members working within the development teams, people who do security-focused code review, configure and tune WAFs, etc., etc. So all of that to me is kind of like AppSec engineering. And then we have researchers in the field as well. So application security research. So in my brain, like there are kind of like four major fields to AppSec. And as AppSec engineering becomes more and more mature, pen testers' job becomes not necessarily harder, but we tend to find less things than we used to, which is a really good thing. We're finding less low-hanging fruits. And we're finding less things like not like command injection, like I said before, file inclusion and things like this. So pen testing has changed a bit, but again, our goals are still the same. But the way we test is evolving slightly as web apps become more mature. And of course, modern web apps from a design and architecture perspective are very different these days than what we used to have. So we need to adjust our approach a little bit, depending on the tech stack or the architectural patterns, development patterns, etc., etc. If you're interested in more of that stuff, then maybe we'll have some time later to talk about like how we might change our focus when we're attacking like microservices versus like an MVC application versus something else. Overall, this is kind of like in a package what a typical pen test looks like. So again, the timing is like a pre-release or on a major update. The scope is typically the entire application, which I think is too much. As a pen tester, I like to see I like the whole application to be in scope, but I like it when an organization is like, these are the new endpoints. And so I can find issues relating to new endpoints within the wider context of the application without going out of scope. But I know where I need to put my time rather than just spending like an hour on each endpoint and trying to get through everything. I can really dig a little bit deeper into the stuff that's new rather than the things that have been tested before. I might go in and sanity check stuff, but I don't want to spend my whole time like working on stuff that I know is probably fine. Typically 1 to 3 weeks is like a typical pen test. And of course, we use a lot of tools, but also manual testing and detailed reports. So most pen test reports are like a day of reporting or something like this. Good question. Will we be able to get the slides? Yeah, I'll publish them somewhere. Let me follow up with Eva. We'll send out an email afterwards. But if you don't get them within a couple of days, send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll share them with you and you can have them. This is also being recorded, by the way, so you'll be able to come back and view and take screenshots and whatever you need. So all good. So this is my general approach. And let me just kind of like step you through And this is in a really particular order. And actually, interestingly enough, I had a chat with Tiberius, who I was working with for a little while. He's now working at a different security company. He has a very different approach. Like, he does things in a different order, and that's really interesting. And I think as a pen tester or AppSec engineer, we all have our own kind of like quirks and approaches and things we like to focus on, which is, yeah, makes the field more interesting rather than, I think some people think that pen testing is just a checklist, but it's not. I promise you, it's not just a checklist. But discovery and recon is really important. More important if I don't have access to source code, I do more discovery and recon, because usually I get a list of endpoints, or I just get given a domain, and most of the time the engineers will be like, oh, here, these are the endpoints that exist, and I'm like, are there no other endpoints? If I go to like v1/v1 instead of /v2 on the API endpoints, I'm not going to find anything. We usually find something, that's been forgotten about, or isn't maintained anymore, or just was hidden for some reason. So discovery and recon, even when you have a developer walk you through the application, is still important. And you want to get to know the application. So for me, code review, I like doing code review. Some pen testers don't touch for code review, but for me, it's an important part of my pen testing methodology, and I tend to do code review whilst I'm testing. Now, next, authentication and authorization attacks. I prioritize these massively, because if you can break authentication or if you can break authorization, it's almost always a critical issue, because authentication and authorization, which we'll talk about more. So if you're not sure about the difference, we're going to go through it, and we're going to do some like authorization / access control breaking later on. They're security controls, and they're really like fundamental to almost every application. So authentication, authorization attacks are right up there. And then I look at business logic issues. I always look at the logic issues early on in my testing, so that I can really understand what the application does, why it's doing what it's doing, what is the intention. And that makes it so much easier. Later on, when you find something quirky, you can almost instantly tell whether it's intended functionality or a quirk of the application that you need to follow, like a thread that you need to follow to find a vulnerability. So I think this is kind of underrated, especially when I talk to a lot of people who do bug bounty. They're kind of like fuzzing, sending lots of payloads, and they're like, oh, I can't find anything. And I'm like, what does this endpoint do? And they're like, oh, I don't know, I'm just fuzzing it. And it's like, well, that's your mistake, right? Is that try and figure out what it's meant to do, and then you're going to be able to come up with edge cases to break it. Or maybe you just find something that returns something funny and it's not a security issue, but you'll find more vulnerabilities that way. And then we look at technology specific attacks. So depending on whether it's like a PHP application, or if it's like a CMS like WordPress, or like a framework or something like this, I tend to then look at specific attacks for specific technology stacks. If it's a MongoDB backend, I'm going to check for like NoSQL injection. If it's can't think of something else. If it's React, I'm going to do more like React specific cross-site scripting attacks and things like this. And then everything else. And then I kind of go into like, not checklist mode, but I'll step through and do all of my sanity checks, because I'm like, okay, these are all the things that I have to check just in case. But the most of my testing, most of my time is spent in these kind of like first sections. And then I do vulnerability scanning and sanity checks. And sanity checks basically means maybe the scanner will throw something that I missed, or it will give me an idea of something that I missed. But I like to do that either in the background and I'll leave it running and I won't look at it till later, or I leave it till the end, because I don't want to have like preconceptions. Like sometimes it'll throw something and then you'll spend half a day following that thread and it's kind of like a waste of your time because it was a false positive, for example. Shouldn't take you half a day to figure that out, but sometimes it happens. And then of course we have reporting as well. So this is like my general methodology. This is a good question. Is the waterfall model still new? Yeah, I think in a lot of organizations it is. It depends on the sector. Like the tech sector, we're moving really fast. But if you work in banking, for example, I mean, you're going to see like Fortran probably, or application, you're going to see all sorts of very slow development methodologies and lots of IaaS Windows servers and things like this. So it does depend on what sector you're in. And I'll just pick up this question as well. So what vulnerability scanners do I prefer? I pretty much use burp suites. I also use Sneak when I'm doing source code review, or if I'm building something. I like the Sneak plugin into Visual Studio Code. I have dabbled with SemGrep. I think SemGrep's quite good, but it's not part of my major workflow at the moment. So those are kind of like, the things that I tend to use. All right, so scanners versus manual testing. Scanners typically find misconfigurations, out-of-date libraries, hard-coded secrets, almost always hard-coded secrets. Trufflehog as well, really, really good for finding like secrets in repositories and things like that. Scanners do a pretty good job of finding injection attacks and things like server-side request forgery. I would say that sometimes if you're just doing some filtering, like if you're filtering out a couple of special characters, that's probably enough to like completely shut down SQL map. So some scanners are pretty sensitive to lackluster security controls, if that makes sense. But some scanners are reasonably robust. So test them, see how you get on. And then, of course, manual testing, logic flaws, broken access control, anything that's multi-step or sequence-oriented, second-order attacks where, so for example, second-order injection is where I inject into an endpoint, it gets like stored in the DB, and then you do something else, and then your attack gets triggered. It doesn't get triggered straight away. Second-order attacks, scanners have a hard time finding these. Security control and WAF bypasses. Scanners not very good at doing WAF bypasses, which is, depending on the WAF and the organization, either usually very straightforward or quite difficult. There's no middle ground with WAF bypasses, unfortunately. And then chained vulnerabilities and demonstrating impact and things like this. So there are some differences. Scanners are great. Automated tools are great. They're a big part of the workflow, but they're not everything. So, this is the main takeaway here. And then we have resources and guidelines and documentation. And I think if you're just starting your journey into AppSec or into web app pen testing, read the guide. Take like an hour, read the OWASP top 10. It's not that it's not super intensive. In fact, if I bring it up very quickly, here we are, like this. We can, these are all the updates. We can go through each of these. Make sure you know each of them are, because this is like really fundamental stuff, because the OWASP top 10 is, of course, issues that come up time and time again, common issues that are often really, really critical. Apart from the odd insecure design category, I feel like almost every vulnerability could fit in here somehow. But the other categories, I think, are really, really solid. So, for example, if we come into injection, you can see a great overview. You can see the description. It gives you some simple examples, tells you how to prevent, attack scenarios, and then links and everything else. So if you're just starting out, it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, OWASP top 10, but actually take the effort, go and read it. And when I interview people, I ask them questions from the OWASP top 10 documentation, and probably 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5 people will, they'll say an answer that's kind of correct, but not necessarily correct. And I'll talk about this example later on, which is defenses against things like injection attacks, because there are defenses that work and there are defenses that kind of work in the right situation, but are not as solid. And if you've read the documentation, you know the difference. So this is really important. The other resource that I use is the OWASP cheat sheet series. This is an amazing resource because you don't have to read 300 pages of a book to get up to date onto something. So for example, if you want to know about securing Docker very quickly, you can read like this 10-minute post, and it's got 11 rules of secure Docker security to get you up and running very quickly. You obviously need to like think about your context and environment and things like this, and apply your experience and logic. But there are so many topics in here that if you need to quickly get up to date on key management, for example, on logging, on Ruby on Rails, do people still write things in Ruby? Does Ruby still exist? XSS filter evasion, there's loads of great stuff here. And like I say, it's not like a 300-page book for each one. It's like a 10-20-minute read for each topic. So these are some of the resources that I recommend. And if you really want to go into stuff, MDM Web Docs is also amazing as well. A couple of great tools. CyberChef, webhook.site. These are also really useful tools. We'll probably take a quick look at CyberChef later on during the lab, so you don't need to pull it up now. And webhook.site, if you don't have Collaborator from Burp Suite Pro, webhook.site is it's like request bin. I think that's like a similar thing. If you send requests, or if you get an application to send a request, you can monitor it on webhook.site, and then you can see the requests coming in. So saves you spinning up servers and things like that. All right, let's talk about injection attacks. So the fun stuff, basically. The biggest thing I want you to think about when we're going through this is not the single tricks that I'm going to teach you, but the methodology and why this vulnerability exists. Because injection attacks exist in lots of different ways and lots of different forms. And I had a student before, and they said, hey, why do we learn this? Because a scanner can do this lab, right? If you scan my labs with Burp Suite, it's probably going to find the injection attack that we're going to look at. We learn it because we're actually trying to understand how applications behave when our input is used in an unsafe way, and does things like mixing our input data with code, or even in some cases just executing our input data, which is of course command injection. And also a lot of scanners can be defeated by incomplete security control. So if you're using a block list, like I said before, and you're dropping some keywords or special characters to prevent an injection attack, that'll stop a scanner, but it won't stop a skilled pen tester. So we still need to know how to manually pen test stuff, even if it's the basics. And of course, we want to be able to find and exploit more complex or subtle issues, and we need a solid grasp of the fundamentals to be able to do that. So, so really, really important. So if you like Node.js, then here's a treat for you. And if you've never seen or heard of Node, or thought that JavaScript only belongs on the front end, then I have a surprise for you. No, I'm just kidding. This is a kind of like a single example. If you don't know any Node, don't worry about it. We're going to walk through it. So first up, for injection attacks, this happens when our input is handled in a dangerous way. So we sometimes not even have to trick, but often we trick the application into using our data. And here you can see a search query. So the search query here is apples. And here we have a post endpoint, so /search. So if you send a post request to /search, this block of code, we're going to enter this branch. And then search query is set to the request.body.search query. So that grabs the value apple and assigns it to this variable. And then we build a SQL query here. So we're saying, hey, query equals select all from products where name is like, quote, percent, and then our search query apples, and then percent, and then quote. And what the percentages do basically is like a regex. So it's like we can have stuff either side of this. So it could be like green apples, red apples, blue apples, Granny Smith apples. I like Granny Smith apples, they're good. And it will return the result rather than an exact match. And then we do the connection.query, and we pass in the query here. So what's happening here is, even if we had some filtering, obviously you can see that we have the search query and then we have the query on the line next. Even if we had some filtering, what's happening is, because we're taking some data and putting it directly into this statement here, we could actually send something that manipulates the statement. So we're mixing data and code. So the code is the SQL select all from products where name like this, and the data is the search query. But if we send like single quotes and something, 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 and a bunch of SQL, we can use our input as SQL. And this is the really dangerous thing where you mix these two things together. And this is the essence of SQL injection. But again, this technique of taking user inputs and using it without processing it properly, or just using it blindly in a statement like this, or passing it to a function or a dangerous function, is injection in general. And that's kind of like what I want you to think about, like why this issue exists, because we're using the input in an unsafe way. And here we have a similar issue. So for example, we have a GET request in this case, and we go to /profile, and the file name is profile.png. And so here we have file name equals request.params file name, and we have const command cat file name. And this is obviously a Linux command, cat, to print out the contents of the file. And then we're executing this. So this is quite rare, like I say, command injection, but we could replace exec with any number of dangerous functions or interesting things. And the methodology here and the reason why it exists is what I want you to remember. So again, we're just passing user input into this dangerous function. And a lot of time when you're doing code review and things like that, if you see exec and you're like, we have an exec function, this is going to execute whatever we pass into it, you can follow it backwards and see whether a user input is, it kind of like filters into it. We do like, when we're doing code review, we can sometimes do source to sync, so we can follow the input and see where it ends up, or we can do sync to source, so we can find where's the dangerous function, how did input end up there, or does input end up there, what controls does it go through, and how do we bypass them. So this is, again, kind of the same thing, but obviously in a different way, and the outcome is different as well. So here we just get code execution on the server, which is much worse than SQL injection. Although very occasionally you can get code execution from SQL injection, but only in like only in CTFs these days. I don't think it's, I haven't seen any production system with code execution from SQL injection in a long time. All right, so testing techniques. So we have fuzzing, which is basically we send a long list of payloads to an application, and we say like, you know, payload 1, payload 2, payload 3, payload 4, and the fuzzer just sends it all, and then we can review the responses, or sometimes some fuzzers will like flag up interesting or weird responses. And then we have tools and scanners like SQL Map, for example, which is technically still fuzzing, but it has a little bit more logic and context around it. So SQL Map, for example, will do like database detection, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm going to choose these payloads because it's this database. It might be like Postgres or Oracle or MySQL or whatever. And then, of course, we have manual testing. And another really, really important point here is, oh, actually, I have a pen. I can use this. Oh, no, I can't. Yeah, I can. Symptoms. Probably the biggest thing for manual testing is learning about symptoms. So learning how web applications behave, being able to spot like weird or quirky behavior, and then following that thread. And I've just realized I've no idea how to like clear the pen, unfortunately. Let me see. Erasing console. There we go. And it's really, really important. So here we've got changes in the response headers. So the response codes, the content length, does the application slow down? Are responses coming faster? Changes in the response body, so the actual content that's coming back to us, error messages if you're lucky, timing of the response, like I said. So having a look at an application, testing it, and then spotting quirky behavior or like symptoms of a vulnerability is really, really important. And then once we've found an injection point with, for example, SQL injection, we can try to steal, manipulate, destroy data. Obviously, don't try and drop tables if that's not in scope for your pen test, which it often isn't. We can try and bypass restrictions. So if we have injection into a login form, it's usually pretty trivial to bypass the login form and log in as a specific user. And very rarely, sometimes we can get code execution. And even more rarely, we can get things like server-side request forgery, but that's, topic for another day. And if you need payloads, so Portswigger has a web security SQL injection cheat sheet. If you just Google Portswigger SQLi cheat sheet, you'll find this. And then I'll share this later as well. I also have my own like public notes on, and you're welcome to use them. Has like references and things like that as well. All right. So how SQL injection works? Let's grab this link. Hold on. I'm going to drop this link into the chat. If I can remember where it is. There it is. Sorry, 1 second. And then I'm going to share this. So we're actually going to do some SQL injection. Not SQL injection. So we're going to do like a proper SQL injection lab after this, but I want to do some SQL first because it's important to understand the fundamentals. All right. So if you click the link in the chat, you'll get this. Right. And this is how I like to teach SQL injection, because if you don't understand SQL, you're going to find SQL injection really difficult. So let's learn a little bit of SQL, right? And this is running on MySQL 5.7. And basically, if you write a SQL statement on the right, so like, for example, select all from products and hit run, you're going to get the results down here. So this is how this application works. I hope you can read the font. Obviously, you can pull it up yourself as well. How do I make that smaller? The results. I don't know, but we'll figure it out as we go. So hopefully, if you can bring it up, then you can obviously see what I'm referring to as well, if the text is a little bit small on the live stream. So on the left, we just have creating the users table, inserting some data, creating a products table, and inserting some data into products. And on the right, all of these are commented out. So -- space is a comment. And if you remove the space, you can run the query, right? So you can obviously run it, and then you can re-comment it out. And I've done this so that you have a bunch of queries that you can see, and then we can like build on top of them. So when we do select all from users, we get Jessamy and Jeremy, and we get password 123, and then we get QWERTY, and Jessamy is the admin and Jeremy is the user. And if we do something like select all from users where username equals Jessamy, of course, it only returns Jessamy. And if we do something like what a typical application would do when we log into an application, so we have select all from users where username equals Jessamy and password equals password 123, it returns this user. So in this case, like the username equals Jessamy, this is obviously our input box of the username, and the password is like the password input box. And then it returns this result. And if we change this to like 1234, for example, we get the password wrong, we don't get any results. Now remember, this doesn't come back to us as the user. This goes to the application, the web server. So we send our request to the web server. The web server makes the query to the database. The results are returned to the application server. It then processes them, and then it comes back to us. So just remember that we never deal directly with the database. We always go through the application server. And in this case, of course, we're seeing the results straight out of the database, but there might be some post-processing that we have to then deal with. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is terminators. So here we have select all from users where username equals just me and password equals 123. So here my input is just me and password 123. But what if my input was just me quotes hash like this? So this, or pound, some people call this pound, but to me it's a hash. So this hash here, which you can also use -- space, but a lot of applications will trim this space, so just make sure that you add an extra character afterwards. What this does is this comments out the rest of the SQL, just like we're doing in this application. And so instead of doing select all from users where username equals just me and password equals the password, we're just saying, hey, select all from users where username equals just me. And we just comment out the rest of the SQL. And this is really, really powerful. And you can see that if we were logging into an application, this would just log us straight in. So this is like a very typical simple login bypass, which these days you'll see more in like capture the flag, but this was a legitimate attack a while ago, and you will rarely see it sometimes in applications. But obviously this is like the first thing everybody checks on every login form. So usually by the time an application lands on your desk as a pen tester, it's probably been resolved, but occasionally you'll find it, so it's worth checking for. And then we also have union select. So now that we know how to bypass logins and terminate things, so if we want to terminate things after our input, we know how to do that. But what if we want to select data from other tables? So we have this products table, and the application is passing our inputs into this name here. So we have select all from products where name equals laptop. Well, what if we also want to select the username and password of the users? We can do that with union select, but there is an interesting quirk. When you use union select, you have to have the same number of columns as the original select statement. So if our select statement said select username and password from users, or select name and price from products, we would have to union select 2 columns. So we couldn't say select name from products where type equals laptop, union select username, password, something else, something else, something else. We can only select 1 column in that case, if that makes sense. And so here, what we can do is we can test this with union select null. So this is our payload here, and then we're probably going to pass like a terminator at the end to finish the SQL, just in case there's anything else trailing afterwards. But this is going to throw an error. You see, we get wrong number of columns in select. But we can keep testing this. We can say, okay, what about 3 columns? Okay, we still get an error. What about 4 columns? Nice. We know how many columns we're returning. Now, obviously, it's easy for us to see here. We can have 4 columns, but when you're dealing, again, with an application, the application may only return 2 of these. You don't know that the application has fetched 4 columns of data and only given you 2 back. So again, you're going to have to be in tune with the application, figure out its behavior. And so here, let's just say we want the username and the password from users. And there we go. We're now returning, instead of just the laptop, we're also returning Jessamy and her password, and Jeremy and their password as well. So union select is really, really powerful if we want to grab data from other columns, from other tables. And something that you might notice is that even though we're only inputting 3 values into here, when you look at this, so we just have laptop, the description, and the price, the actual table description has 4, so the ID is like auto increments, and you can see that here. So just a heads up in case you're wondering why it's 4 columns instead of 3. And one last thing before we just wrap up and then start taking a look at the actual lab, we can also do some quirky things like select all from products where name equals laptop, union select table name from information.schema underscore schema dot tables. And we can return like the DB version and table names and column names and all sorts of things. So if we don't know what we're looking for, if we don't know that there's an admin underscore users table in the database, we can use this or something very similar to enumerate the database and retrieve that information. So if you want to a cheat sheet again, so the Portswigger, actually let me do it here. So if I do Portswigger SQLi cheat sheet, you can see like we're working MySQL at the moment. You can see very similar attacks. So yeah, here select all from information underscore schema dot columns. And so here, once we've got the table name, which we've just enumerated here, we can plug that into the table name, and then we can see what columns exist in that table. So we can like gradually find more and more information. All right. Yeah, so things like inner join and stuff like that. As long as you have valid SQL, you're good to go. That's it. So yeah, if you're like a SQL guru, if you can make it work, 100%. The trick is just to not throw like an error. So like if you have invalid SQL, so for example, here we've got too many columns, you're just gonna get invalid SQL, if that makes sense. So if it's valid, it works. Basically, you might run into some permissions. So for example, into out file, load file, MySQL exec and stuff like that. A lot of that by default isn't switched on, or depending on what user you have, you might be able to, like, if you're the root user in the DB, yeah, maybe you can drop tables, but the current user might not be able to do that. And I think you can enumerate with, I can't remember, like, wait, is it just user? I can't remember how to enumerate the current user of the DB, but you can. There is a way to do it. You can look up MySQL, how to find current user. All right, let me take this down. And so useful links. I'll try and share them while we're doing the lab. I'll try and post some links. But Portswigger, obviously you can just Google OWASP testing guide. If you need to test something and you're not sure how to test it, the OWASP testing guide is a good place to start. It's pretty detailed. Payloads, all the things and hack tricks. If you need payloads to fuzz, or if you see something that you've never seen before, these are also quite good resources to quickly get up and running with an attack. All right, let's do some labs. So we have quite a lot of people. So what I've done is I've spun up 3 of the same lab, and just to avoid, like, any lag or something like that, you can choose the relevant one. So what I've basically done is if your name begins with A to H, then use the first lab. If your name begins with I to P, then use the second lab. And if your name begins with P to Z, use the third one. And if you're awesome and your name doesn't contain the English alphabet, then use whichever one you like. Your dealer's choice. So let me put this in the chat and also pull one up quickly. And we'll explain how this works. Oh, sorry, 1 second. You know what I forgot? Docker compose up. Give me a second. Let me just make sure they're running. Fingers crossed it actually works. I can see the DB is just spinning up very quickly. 1 second. Let me refresh this and send a new request. Hopefully they actually work. Oh, sorry, I'm going to HTTPS. Don't go to HTTPS. Go to HTTP. So they're all running on port 80. Now, the labs are rate limited, so heads up. If you refresh aggressively, like this, oh yeah, did you see it there? You'll get rate limited. So just a heads up, they like don't send too many requests at once. I think it's 20 requests a second, so you should be fine. All right, let me make this bigger. Here we go. So there are 3 flags in this lab, and you only need to use the techniques that we've already talked about. So SQL injection, terminators, union select, and basically what I've done is I've made it so you can see your SQL statements. And once again, remember that you need to have valid SQL in order to inject. So if we inject a single quote, you can see that we have an error in our syntax. And then if I search for cat again, you can see our input is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all 5 minutes to have some fun and see if you can find one of the flags. Or if you find 2 or if you find 3, that's awesome. And then we'll walk through it together. And I'll share the solutions with you. Heads up, if you start scanning the application, I do have a WAF that if you start battering it, it'll block you. So don't go too crazy, but manual input should totally be fine. And once again, if you're at work and your security team, if you see some messages come up, just tell them you're doing like a CTF or a live class or something. But you can, third one didn't show up. Did it not? Sorry, 1 second. Let me post the links individually. So SQLi 1, SQLi 2. And once you have the flag, so I don't have like a leaderboard up for today, but feel free to post it in the chat. Feel free to share. I mean, it's like, this is just for like a learning session. Okay, so if you find the flag, that's awesome. We're all friends here. Help each other out. Ask questions. There's no rules. It's not a strict CTF. We're here to learn. Sorry, yeah, it might have still been spinning up if it was a little bit slow. Yeah, it looks like they should all be up now, and I can see some traffic coming in. So that's awesome. All right, so I'll give you another 4 minutes, and then we're going to go through the first flag together, and then I'll give you another 5 minutes, and we'll go through the second flag, and then and then 5 more minutes, and then the third flag. And while we're doing that, oh, nice, a couple of people got in already. Good job, ZN and Christian. Yeah, nice one, awesome. Pro hackers in the chat. All right, I'll shut up for a few minutes and then we'll work through it together. But remember what we learned: terminators, union select, and have fun. All right. So I can see a bunch of people got it already. So congratulations. And also, yeah, good point from Louis as well. So we can also see information about the database and in particular, like the database name and things like that. And that might be useful in crafting attacks later on. So any information you can find, super, super helpful. And that's the mindset that you need to get into when we're pen testing. So awesome. And so here, what I like to do is, let me grab this actually, and let me bring up Notepad. And what I do is, if I have this here, I like to think about, so my input goes here, and then I think about how can I make valid SQL? And all I want to do is either I could maybe finish this percentage, send a quote, and then send the terminator. And if this is my inputs, this is probably enough to cancel out the and available equals true, because we may want to see things that are unavailable, for example. And so let's send this and submit it. And you can see we get this cat bed, which is not currently available, and we get our first flag. So this is the kind of like the first important thing when we're attacking SQL injection is, can we terminate the rest of code to avoid where filters or where clauses? And so here we've just got an and, but for example, we might have another where here or something else at the end that we want to just cancel out or bypass. So this is the approach, if that makes sense. All right, I will give you 5 more minutes for the next flag. So there's another flag, and I'm going to give you a hint. So it's in another table. And so let me check my hints, actually, see whether I'm not doing too much. Yeah, so should I give you the table name? Yeah, let me give you the table name. There is a table called users. And what I want you to do is try and use the union select attack to see whether you can steal the username and passwords from the users table. So yeah, in 4.5 minutes, we'll go through it together. Good luck. You still got a few minutes for this next one, so don't forget we're looking at union and we're trying to grab the information out of the users table. But if you already found that, then you're welcome to try and search for the third flag, but I won't give you a hint yet. So as for the labs, so I can see a few people asking about them. So I'll leave them on for about 30 minutes after the session. It'll get quite late here. I don't want to leave them on overnight because they're vulnerable labs and I don't want somebody to break into my servers and do crazy stuff. But I'll leave them on for about half an hour. And then if you get in touch after the session, I can spin them up another time for you as well, for sure. So I think if you have me on Discord or if you have me on LinkedIn, just ping me a message and we'll find it. And if you just give me like 2 hours when you're free. I'll make sure they're spun up for that time. So we'll figure it out. All good. All right, a couple more minutes before we go through the union select. All right, so let's take a look at the union select. And I want to take a couple of minutes to think about this one because the methodology here is quite important. So we know that there is a table called users, and we'll talk about how to enumerate the table names in the last section, because the last challenge is finding the secret table and getting some information out of it. But if we have here, we want to union select, and remember that we said we needed the right number of columns. And from what we can see, we can make a guess that there are at least 3 columns because we have 3 types of data coming back. So we have the cat toy, the description, and the price. And so let's try null, null, null like this, and then try and just like terminate this. And I'm just going to pop that on my clipboard. And the used select statement has a different number of columns. So what we can do is we can just keep going. 4, 5. So there are 5 columns. And so probably there's an ID being returned. Maybe there's like the availability column that's being returned. And yeah, that makes sense. That makes 5 columns, right? Because we know that this is also a column in the DB. And here, what we want to do is sometimes, by the way, so if we look at the different data types, like this one, if this was not a string and it was like a float or something like this, we wouldn't be able to return, like grab strings like usernames and return it in this column. So sometimes you can test this by like passing test, for example, like this, and we can see that this one here is indeed a string. So in this one, we want to try and grab the username. And let's say in the next one, we want to try and grab the password. And in this case, we're just using a logical guess from users. And if we had a fuzzer and we had this, but we didn't know the user's name, we could fuzz for this. But there is also a technique, like we briefly looked at, to get the table names. So I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to see whether you can find the hidden table, like the secret table, and then grab the data from that, and that will give you the final flag, which I think, Shane, good job. You already managed to find this one. So I think you were the first. So at least as far as I can see in the chat. So nice, solid. But yeah, so here, union select, null, username, password, null, null, from, and we can put this in capitals to make it a little bit more readable, from users. And then once again, we can use our terminator to get rid of the end. And here we can see we have the admin user. And again, we have Jessamy, Jeremy, password 1, and password 2. All right, good luck with the final challenge, and then we'll walk through it together. Then we'll look at like remediation and some other things, and then we'll move on to broken access control, authorization, authentication, etc., etc. All right, about 90 seconds left for this one. Just for fun, by the way, if you want to see what uh, I can see on the monitoring side, I'm SSH'd into all of the boxes, and I can see all of your payloads coming through on the left. So, just for fun, this is what I'm monitoring at the moment. So there you go. Yeah, so the labs are all Dockerized at the moment. I use Docker Compose for pretty much all of my labs. So I'll definitely package up like a version and post it on GitHub soon. I have some that they're in a weird place at the moment, but yeah, there's fun things in the pipelines with my labs. So there's a few things that I want to fix and change and some other stuff before I post it to the world. But yeah, all good. Yes. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, the load file gets filtered. But if you can bypass the filter, then fair game to you. But I don't think so one of the issues currently is the DB user is actually the root user on the DB. So you do have quite a lot of permissions. But I'm filtering some stuff, but the filter is also bypassable. So there's that. All right, so let's take a look at the last flag. So we know that we need to find or enumerate tables within the database. So we can use table name like this. So we want to union select table name, but instead of from users, we actually want to pull this from the information schema, which is like information schema is like a group of views basically, and we need this specific view, information schema tables. And if you want to go deep onto stuff like this, then a DBA or somebody who really knows SQL will just like, blow your mind. It's a worthwhile conversation to have and to dig into. But here you can see we can use this to not drop, but show all of the tables in the database. And all the ones that encapsulate up here, these are all pretty just like default tables in MySQL. So this is all default stuff. And sometimes you'll see data like this and you actually just need to scroll through and be like, okay, is this interesting? Is this not interesting? Part of hacking, unfortunately, sometimes is trawling through data and just figuring stuff out to decide whether it's worth checking out or not. But we can, for example, search, and actually it came up here, but I just totally missed it. We have this cat secrets table, which in the context of our application is very useful. And I think it was, I can't remember what guidelines, this was about 10 years ago. I read some guidelines somewhere where they were like, oh, you should have a separate admin table to your normal user tables. And it's like, it's safer. And it's like, no, if we have injection, we can just use union select and select it anyway. That's security through obscurity and more difficult to maintain. But you will find systems that have different tables or even different databases because they're big, complex applications and things like this. So sometimes you'll need to do this anyway. And then we can search for like column name from information.schema.columns, and then from cat secrets. Oh yeah, where table name equals. I was just thinking that, I was like, wait, how does this attack work again? Secrets, like this. It's late in the evening. It's gone 8 p.m. by the way for me. So, and then here, yeah, we can see it has two columns. We have ID and secrets. And with this information, we can, of course, return secrets from cat secrets. And we get our final flag. So this is like the way that we might follow a thread through a vulnerability and either increase our impact, especially if you're doing bug bounty, and be like, oh, this is how we actually demonstrate exploitation. I was working at a company before, and there was SQL injection, and it was posed as a feature, and the engineer that found it was like, oh, hey, you've basically created like SQL injection as a service. And the dev was like, yes, I meant to do that. So what, blah, 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 blah. And it did get a little bit heated on the ticket. And the pen tester's like, well, okay, drop tables and just drop to the DB. It wasn't a prod system or anything like that. But being able to demonstrate impacts, obviously, don't fight with your colleagues, but being able to demonstrate impact is really, really important. And this is a way we can enumerate information and go through, and hopefully you've learned a little bit about like troubleshooting. And a lot of the times, like obviously we've got like error messages here. We might have to do this without error messages, but the application might respond a little bit differently. So instead of sending this error message, it might just give us no results. And the fact that we have results and then no results, that's like a behavior change. And that's what we need to be on the lookout for, stuff like that. So nice. All right, great job, everybody. So feel free to just I'll leave those running for now. So if you want to, keep putting in payloads, then by all means. Great job if you found a flag. And if you didn't find them, or if you found it really difficult, don't worry. We're all at different parts of our journey, and next time it's going to be easier. And what I usually recommend, so this is kind of how I do my live classes as well. So if you ever come to one of my classes, this is kind of a similar format. I would say update your notes. That's one of the biggest things you can do to get good at pen testing, is writing stuff down and keeping notes, because you will see the same patterns again and again and again and again. Slightly different context, and the skill is to be able to apply the technique to a slightly different context, but you'll still see the same patterns. So really, really important. All right, how do we fix and prevent SQL injection? So our immediate response is use prepared statements. And if you ever get this as an interview question, this is your default answer, use prepared statements. This is because what it does is it separates the query from the input and the data, and then it compiles the query, and then it adds the data afterwards and sends that to the DB, and then the DB can never get confused between what is data and what is the SQL query. Now, a lot of people, when I've interviewed them, have said input validation and filtering. Yes, input validation and filtering can stop SQL injection, but it can also be incomplete. For example, if you use a block list, we might be able to bypass it if you don't block the right characters. We might be able to use escaping. We had this really old issue called multi-byte injection, where we were able to create, if you were using like different character sets of like Chinese or Japanese, you could create different characters and bypass like escaping and things like this. It's kind of an old attack, doesn't really matter these days, but input validation filtering is really important in terms of defense in depth, but your prevention for SQL injection is prepared statements, and that's always like the number one gold standard answer. And then using an ORM. So using an ORM can also help. Some ORMs, they should be using prepared statements because they do like the relational mapping and then basically convert your code into statements. Occasionally they do have vulnerabilities, and there are some like edge cases and things like that. But again, so it kind of comes into like the kind of, yes, it helps and probably it'll be okay, but we're talking about like 99% or more than 99%, but you can never be sure. Whereas with prepared statements, you can always be sure. There is one little caveat. There is a way you can use prepared statements without using the bind in like Java, for example, and it doesn't quite work. But using the prepared statements properly, you'll be fine. Just don't do anything too crazy if you're an engineer. So that's the way to go. But in terms of like a strategic response, so if you're a team lead, or if you're an engineer, or if you're working with a bunch of developers, or if you're a CISO, or if you're an IT manager, actually what I recommend you do is when somebody finds SQL injection on your application, is your gut reaction isn't go through all the whole application and fix all of these prepared statements, is to think about secure development training for your team, or security champions and culture change. Think about why this problem exists, and how did your developers write code that is insecure, and how can we make it so that either they catch it earlier in the development lifecycle so that it's cheaper to fix, or that it doesn't happen at all. So think about the root cause analysis, mentoring from senior engineers, pair programming. Every time you have a new engineer join your team, pair programming does wonders, because not just they're going to get to learn your code base and the quirks and the interesting things about it, but they're going to it's kind of like mentorship as well, and they can share ideas and things like that. So I think that's really important. We should do pair pen testing. That would be cool. Code review, threat modeling, internal development guidelines, all of these things are really, really important. So actually, in my opinion, all of that is way more important than the immediate response, because, oops, something just happened. It's not that hard to fight fires. You can go around and fight fires all day, but if you really want to improve your application, or your team's application, or your organization's application, you need to steer the ship. You can't be fighting fires all day. So that's my spiel on think more strategically when you get a pen test and it has findings on it. So an ORM basically is like, as Steve said, it's an object relational model. So you can use it to interact with the database, but the syntax is different, and it basically abstracts the database. So you're working in objects, just a style of development, I suppose, like a library that you can use to make interacting with the database easier, if that makes sense. I don't use them that often, so I used a bit of SQLite and things like that, but yeah, all good. All right, so let's talk about broken access control. And we're running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. So apologies for that. So we're going to run through broken access control. So let's skip to the next slide. Authentication and access control, these are two really important things. So authentication is providing your identity, it's proving you are who you say you are, and access control is what you're allowed to do. So when you check into a hotel, you show your passport, your driving license, your ID, and you say, hey, I've got a booking, and they're like, okay, here's your room key. Your room key is your access control, so you can get into your room, the restaurants, the gym, maybe the executive suite. Unfortunately, I never get into the executive suite, even if I try and sneak in. But that's like what you're allowed to do. And it's important that we separate these two because enforcing the two are usually two completely different parts of the application, and a vulnerability in one can sometimes impact the other, but we test them a little bit differently. Authentication issues tend to come from lack of brute force protection and logic issues. Authorization, access control issues tend to arise from business requirements not meeting functional requirements, hidden endpoints and things like that, which we'll talk through. And there are many types of broken, there are many types of models for access control. So we have like role-based access control, which I think is probably the most common. So you have like users and administrators and moderators and subscribers and things like this, and they can do different things. And a lot of them can do the same things, but only within limited scopes, which we'll talk about in a second. And then we can enforce access controls with like, can we check their role? Are users allowed to do this? Are moderators allowed to do this, etc.? We can do permission checks. We can use access control lists, middleware, policy engines. Depends on the size and complexity of the application. There are actually quite a lot of different ways to implement access controls. But access controls, as soon as like it gets more complicated, the web gets bigger and like problems occur, and this is where pen testers thrive. Complexity is the enemy of security. So where there's complexity, there's probably security vulnerabilities. And we have a couple of different controls. So horizontal access control. So let's say that I can access as a user my account and I can update my account, but I can't update another user's account. So we have the same, we're both users, and our access control is that the scope of the access is so that we can only impact ourselves, for example, in this case. The administrators might be able to disable user accounts. And so if I was, so that's like a vertical access control instead of a horizontal one. So, and it's important to kind of look for both. And usually IDOR, Insecure Direct Object Reference, is going to be like a horizontal issue. And privilege escalation is a vertical issue, which we'll look at in a second as well. So setting up for broken access control, we have authentication. So this is what a typical web application does when you log in. So we post to the login endpoints. Our username is Jeremy and our password is apples. And it does this typical SQL query, which we just learned about. So select all from users where username equals Jeremy and password equals apples. This returns a row of data to the application, and then it sets a cookie in the user's browser called token. Then when we make a request to /profile, we send our cookie with that, and the application validates our token. And it says, hey, is this valid? If yes, get the data from the database and then return the profile information. If not, forward them to the login page. So the access control in this case is, I can't write anymore for some reason. Let's go back to laser pointer. The access control is happening here, this valid token. This is the check that's happening, if that makes sense. This is all authentication, and this is authorization or access control. All right, so let me spin this up quickly because I want to show you quickly how to interact with cookies and network requests and things like that, as you'll need this for our next lab. And in fact, I'm going to use the lab as my example. So bear with me 1 second. All right. So if you're in Chrome, and I think Firefox, you can, I always use the shortcuts. I use Control-Shift-C, and this brings up the developer tools, right? And let me do this. And here, this is the lab that we're going to do in a second, but I want to show you a couple of things. First is the network tab. Now, it might be called something slightly different if you're in a different browser, but it'll be there somewhere. And you might have to go like view dev tools or something like this to pull it open. But I use the Control-Shift-C shortcut. And oh no, F11 as well, I think. No, F12 also brings this up. So there's two shortcuts. I don't know how to use the menu. I'm a shortcut kind of person. And if we register, so if I register Alex and the password is Alex, when we come to the network tab, here we can see requests being made. So for example, you can see the request to get this image. You can see the request to get the CSS. You can see a request to slash. And here you can see this post request. So this is us sending the form slash register. You'll need this once you log in to the application and do things like updating your password. You'll need to see what it's doing in here. So the network tab is important. The other tab that I want to show you is the application tab. And this might be called something slightly different in Firefox. I can't remember. I'll check in a second. But under here, you can come to cookies and you come in here. And this is your token. And actually what I've done is I've put it on the page as well. So you can see that this is actually JSON Web Token. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But know that you can see the application here, sorry, the cookie here in the application as well. And you can see things like local storage, session storage, et cetera, et cetera. But these should all be empty because the application isn't using them. All right, so just remember, you're going to need to use DevTools for the next labs. And don't worry, we'll go back over this soon as well. So I know that that was like a very quick, like press this and do this. Yeah, so in Firefox, it's under storage rather than application. So nice one. But yeah, we'll go back over it in a second as well. But know that, you know, have a play with it and make sure you can get the dev tools up. So now we have the most common I think, issue that I see being reported in like bug bounty and everything else. I still think that cross-site scripting is probably the most common finding, but the most, maybe number two is like IDOR, insecure direct object reference. And we're seeing this more and more because applications are API driven or they're decentralized applications. We're seeing this. And basically what happens is we have like an object, like a user, and that object has attributes like a username and a password and a signed up and an address and an ID. And if the ID is like 12345 and it's like, hey, get accounts ID equals 12345. Well, what happens if we change that to 123456 or 1234 or 16538 or just change the username, for example? Can we still do the same thing but with a different object ID? And so when we grab objects directly, we can kind of introduce this vulnerability. And this is an access control issue. We shouldn't be able to do that. In some cases, we should be able to do it, but in a lot of cases, we can't. And you can see the example here. And to test this, especially if you're doing bug bounty, and I can't really stress this enough, always create 2 user accounts and attack yourself. Don't attack customers of a production application. Don't be going like, oh, I'm just going to change this ID to this, or I'm just going to try and update the password of a user ID that I don't know exists. Like, I don't know. Always create 1 account and then a second account or like and test, can user A impact user B, can user B impact user A, and same for when you're testing vertical access controls. Can a user access this admin endpoint, for example? So create a user, create a moderator, create an admin. The admin can delete users. Well, if I use the user cookie to send that request, so I'm sending it as a user, can I still do that, essentially? This is basically A/B testing. And so kind of like visually represented. So here we have login question ID equals 1242. Select all from users where ID equals 1242. Returns a row of data. Can we change this to something else? Does it return sensitive data of other users? And this is really easy to find. Sometimes it can be a little bit more complex where the ID is a really long GUID and you can't predict it. And so the impact there would be much lower. But oftentimes we can find another endpoint in the application that might leak GUIDs of other users. And so sometimes you can get around that. Again, depends on the application. And that's why we do manual testing, because we can tie these two things together and create an impact. Otherwise, like this super random GUID, they'll be like, well, you can't brute force accounts, you can't get information because it's a random, too long to brute force ID, but we might be able to steal it from somewhere else. And same goes for, gosh, we're really behind on time, apologies. And same goes for things like request methods. So we have get, post, put, delete. We won't go like super deep into HTML, but obviously like when we post, we want to create a resource, put to update a resource, delete to delete a resource. Get admin dashboard, we might get unauthorized, but if we post to admin dashboard, we might get okay. So the access control might be on the get request method, but it might not be applied the same to the post request method. And same with post update user, we might be able to put update user as a low privileged user. So these are also things that we need to test when we're testing for broken access control. And I cover a lot of this in my API security course, heads up, if you're interested in finding out more. All right, let me send the links in to the next thing. I'm going to send them separately. So let me send one. And then if your name is I to P, and then if your name begins with P to Z. Oh, I should have changed the P to something else because it's in both of them, but just choose one, you're fine. You should get the application that I had a second ago. Oh, not this one. Hold on. Let me grab this one. This one. All right, so once again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do the flag. And what I want you to do is have a look at the application. And the first thing we're looking for is insecure direct object reference. So try and find a part of the application, register a user. Obviously don't use like your banking password. This is not a secure application. Other people are going to steal your password. So just use password 123 or whatever. Create a user account like I did. So just Alex password, for example, log yourself in. Find a way to view other users' account information using IDOR, and you're going to get the flag if you can find a sensitive account. So there's a little bit of like CTF mindset there, but you're going to have to find an account that is not just like Bob or Alice, for example. All right, I will give you a few minutes, and then we'll walk through it together. Good luck. Nice, that was fast. Good job. Oh, and actually, good job, Richard. You managed to get a couple of them. Yeah, so for this, I'm going to keep the labs open for about an hour after the class. And then after that, I've got to go to bed. So I'm gonna shut them down, but they'll be open for a while afterwards for sure. And then if you want access again, we'll organize a time to spin them up again. So just a heads up on this. If you already got one flag, then feel free to start investigating the other functionality on the application. So obviously the update password is another piece of functionality you can investigate. Obviously the admin panel is another piece of functionality you can investigate. The app does say 2 flags. I forgot to update it. There are 3. There's 3 total flags. So, but yeah, but don't rush. If you're still working on the first one, you've still got a few more minutes. And then, of course, we're going to walk through it together. So all good. All right, so let's take a look at this first issue. And what I'm actually going to do is we're going to take a look at the first couple because otherwise we're going to run out of time. So apologies for that. So the first one, yeah, is the IDOR. So here it's probably very small, so apologies for that. But we can access other accounts if we type Jeremy, for example, and we could set up a fuzzer to do this, but if we access the account admin, then we get this flag, which is pretty nice. And you'd be surprised how often this works. And it's not always in the URL. Sometimes it's in the body of a request. Sometimes we need to go into our proxy and edit it. But the methodology is the same. Look out for unique identifiers and tamper with them, and you'd be surprised how often this works. Now, the next one, I'm going to walk you through this. If you haven't done already, I know a bunch of you have already have done this one. Here, if we update the old password to, in fact, actually, I'm going to create 2 accounts and do this. So one is going to be A1 and one is going to be A2. And if you're in Firefox, by the way, there's a great plugin called Firefox Containers, and it creates completely separate sessions in different tabs and color codes them at the top. And that's what I use generally for my access control testing. So Firefox Containers, brilliant plugin. So if we change our password, so I'm just going to set it again to the same thing, A1, because, whoops, my janky app doesn't check to see whether they are the same. And we come into here. Here you can see the update. So the ID is A1 and the old pass is A1 and the new password is A1. So what I want to do is actually to simplify, what I did is I did this in the URL. More often than not, of course, you'd see this in the body of the request. Because this is a little dangerous passing passwords in the URL, but to make it more accessible. But the methodology is exactly the same. So what I want to do is change this so that the ID A2 is set to this password. And then when you update the account of A2, which is not our account, you can see we're logged in as A1, we get our flag. So again, kind of like manipulating this ID that's being passed. And of course, what should happen is the application on the back end should verify this ID via our token rather than via the data that we're passing to it. So if you're building an application, anything the user passes to you is potentially tampered with, potentially unsafe. You can't trust it. You always need to verify. And finally, we have this account type, which is user. So this is a JSON Web Token, which I was hoping we'd have time to dive into JSON Web Tokens, but we've got to keep moving forward. But maybe on live stream, I think I'm live streaming next week, the week after, because Heath is doing my live stream next week. But the week after, maybe we'll do a JWT week. Here, this cookie is actually a JSON Web Token. So if we go to something like jwt.io, it's base64 URL encoded, so we just have the header, the body, and the signature. And this is really fast. So if you have no idea what's going on, don't worry. This is like more advanced stuff. We can just change this to super user. Obviously, we don't know the signing key, but we don't necessarily need it in this case, because what we can do is we can just place it in here, go to the admin panel, and we get access to the admin panel, because what's happening in the code is we're decoding the code token and we're not verifying it. And occasionally people will just make this mistake. Instead of using token.decode, instead of token.verify, so I just made the mistake, they'll decode it and not verify the signature. Or for example, we can tamper with it, change the algorithm type, do JWT header injection. There are a bunch of things we can do to try and trick the application, or if there's a weak signing key, we can crack it and things like this. JWTs are a whole world of attacks and a lot of fun. So I definitely recommend, JSON Web Tokens is worth exploring. But this is how we get the final flag. All right, so 15 minutes left, let's go. So immediate response, denied by default is, I think, something that more people should take seriously within their applications, because you will always give access where access is needed, but you'll often forget to deny access where you shouldn't have it. So denied by default is really, really important. Oh, this is, changed admin password, but no flag, unfortunately. So yeah, I didn't think of that one. Maybe I'll add that in as an Easter egg flag, like a bonus flag. And then mapping access controls to requirements is also really, really important. So this is something that we should do, and keeping like an access control matrix as your master matrix. So as a developer, you can test all of your access controls and you can automate them. And if you're using APIs and you're using Postman, you can set up a collection and you can test all of your access controls very, very rapidly. And so it's not that difficult to do. And then every time there's an update, you just click run and it tests all of your controls. So it does take a little bit of time, maybe a few hours to set up initially, but after that, it's going to pay dividends for sure. And then centralization of access control mechanisms. So if you're having to write functions for access control, and then you're having to write other functions, or within the endpoint, you're saying, hey, I'm allowing these users, but not these users, that's not scalable code. That's a terrible idea. And again, things like peer programming, mentoring, and onboarding new users onto your team properly, guidelines, secure development guidelines, code review, security champions, all of that is going to help prevent bad practices like that from cropping up, basically. So that's really, really important. All right. Next up, how to start your web app pen test career. If I had to start again, I'm going to recommend two things. One is, of course, you can take with a pinch of salt because the second thing is obviously the one that I'm going to suggest. But the first one, sign up to TryHackMe, and they have a great web fundamentals path. It takes you through Burp Suite, it takes you through the basics of HTTP, it takes you through OWASP Top 10. I think it's a really great path, and I think this is a really good way to get started. A lot of it is free, and you don't necessarily have to pay. Some of the rooms are subscriber rooms, so you might have to pay like the $10 or $15 a month that it is. It's not very expensive, but I think this is like a great place to start. Personally, if you like my courses and my style of teaching, where I kind of throw labs and methodology and more like thought process with examples, then the Practical Bug Bounty course is also a really good place to start. It's on, and it's called Practical Bug Bounty because we did a partnership with Integrity, and Jonah from Integrity also contributed to it, and Heath did quite a lot of content on it, and also I built all the labs for it and did all the lab stuff for it. So it's quite a mixture of things, but there's also things like report writing in there, proving impact, a lot of common attacks and things like this. So, but of course, I'm going to suggest that you take my course. So feel free to check out TryHackMe first and then see how you get on. After that, Portswigger is kind of like the de facto standard for sure. Portswigger's content is amazing. Doesn't all come with video walkthroughs, more like reading and stuff like that. But the beginner and the practitioner labs are fantastic. And I think it's like really, a lot of it is like really fundamental stuff. So definitely check out Portswigger, and that's all completely free as well. The great thing about AppSec is it's actually very cheap to do. Like all of the courses and even the certifications, like the AppSec certs, which there aren't many of them, are all really accessible. So. And then what I recommend you do is start participating in like capture the flags and start doing stuff. I definitely recommend you supplement your learning, build a small web app, learn about application security, do it from like the builder and the defender side. That's going to really help you understand how the attacks work, the context in which they live, and it's going to help like catapult you. I think a lot of people plateau and they're like, oh, how do I get better? Actually, what you need to do is learn about web applications to get better, if that makes sense. And then maybe consider a certification after that. So that's definitely it. Some of my pro tips. Get used to Burp Suite. It's now your new best friend since you're all going to be AppSec engineers or web app pen testers and things like that. Even when I was building as a developer, I was using Burp Suite to test my application for just functional testing because it's so useful. It's such a good tool. But like I say, learn a little bit about how web apps are designed or built and build one. And if you don't have an idea for building a small web app, you can build like a task list or like a calendar or something. Build a CTF and share it. Like the labs that we've done today are just things that I build. And that's how I keep on top of my development skills. Use all the tools, compare the results to your own findings. No tool is perfect. And being good at AppSec requires you to have a research mindset. And I think that means that a lot of the time you can't just run something and expect it to work as, out of the box. Sometimes it does, and that's wonderful. But a lot of the times you need to dig deeper and hypothesize about what's happening under the hood and then try and work with that, if that makes sense. And I hope today, you've really got the message of the symptoms of web applications and how they behave and things like this. And then consistency is everything. That's the more you do, the better you're going to get, for sure. And we have some time for questions. Yes, we got 10 minutes left for questions. And here are my two demon cats, which are running around the house somewhere, destroying things. My house looks like Mordor just because of these two little furry rats. But yeah, thank you so much for OWASP Seattle and WiCyS and Eva, Ben, and Michael and everybody else who's contributed to make this session what it is, and also some of the team. I've seen you in the chat as well, helping out as well. So thanks to you guys, and of course everybody who's attended. And there's some links on screen. So there's the TCM link. We have a Discord. There's like 50K members. If you want to hang out with us, come and hang out. And then the bottom one is my link tree. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn or whatever, LinkedIn's the best way to connect with me. That's where I'm most active. Again, if you want the to spin up the labs another time, LinkedIn is your best bet to get in touch with me, or Discord. I'm usually on there as well. All right, let me take some questions. Let me see. Hold on. Let me pull open the chat. Let's see. Okay, this is a great question. Are your cats named Jeremy and Jessamy? No. So the ginger one is Elfie, and the the silver tabby is Poppy. But I didn't actually name them. They came named because we rescued them. So, but good question. I should have done that. Do you have any recommendation on certifications that employers look for? So in general, of course, there are the big certifications, things like OSCP, that I think are pretty useful to have. In the world of AppSec, it really depends. Like, there's no one dominant certification for web app pen testers or AppSec. And what's been happening is, in the past, is network pen testers have also been doing web app pen testing, but web app pen testing has kind of like become more and more of its own thing because it requires quite a specific skill set, especially now the issues are becoming more complex. If I had a recommendation, Burp Suite's certified Burp Suite practitioner is probably an intermediate to senior because it's very difficult. We also have some certs over at TCM, so you're welcome to check those out as well. But I think if I was to interview someone and employ them, I would be impressed if they had Burp Suite, the Burp Suite certification for sure. From an AppSec point of view, if you are going for a network pen test job, don't expect the hiring manager to know what that is. They'll just be like, oh, the standard ones and things like this. All right. What courses on TCM would you recommend taking in order? Okay, so if you're interested in network penetration testing, start with the PEH. That's like the foundation, and I did the web section in there as well. So if you want like a wide set of skills, this is the way to go. But if you want to do web app pen testing, then practical bug bounty first, then either the practical API hacking or the practical web hacking courses. Those two are kind of the same level. I think the API course is really, really important these days because more and more applications are API driven, and it's kind of like the most overused and under. It's such a big technology. Everything is API driven, and not many pen testers test APIs. It's bonkers to me. Like, I don't get it. So the API course is definitely a heads up. But yeah, PH, if you want to like everything, is good. Let me keep scrolling down. So I'm just at the bottom of the chat, by the way. So if I missed your question already, please repost it now, and then I can see it again. So I'm kind of like, I'm at the bottom of the chat, and I know that I obviously like scrolled through tons of stuff accidentally. Oh, you're working on OSCP? Yes, I definitely recommend. So ignore the what's the general? There's like a hack the box list by I can't remember his name. Don't do the hack the box list. Do the what are OffSec's labs called? Wait, no, I can't remember what they're called now. I should know. OffSec labs. What they call Proving Grounds. That's it. Do the Proving Grounds labs because they're all going to be in the same style. So the easy and the medium Proving Grounds labs are going to prepare you way better for the exam than any Hack the Box machine. So Hack the Box is great, don't get me wrong. But if your exam is 1 month out and you want to like really work hard to get it, Proving Grounds is the way to go for sure. And do like the hour and a half, see how you do for an hour and a half. If you need to peek at the walkthrough, have a peek. Don't waste a whole day on one small issue, for example. Thanks to Proving Grounds, I passed my OSCP in 4 hours, I think. I did it on the second try. I failed the first time, and then I put a ton of time into Proving Grounds and then cleared it in 4 hours. So that's how good Proving Grounds is in terms of practice. The best API scanner. I can't give you a best one. I know Burp Suite have kind of upped their API scanning game recently. To be honest, I tend to test them manually, and I have I have a bunch of scripts that I use, and I use Postman, and I tend to just import collections and do it that way. But honestly, I don't use a lot of scanners outside of Burp Suite, so that's kind of your answer. And that might be a mistake on my part, actually. I might be a little bit behind in terms of the scanner game for APIs. So this isn't me saying there isn't a good one. It's just that in the last year or so, I haven't really explored it very much because I just use Burp Suite. So that's probably not an ideal answer. So sorry about that, but hopefully that, gives you some kind of answer. All right. Let me scroll down a little bit more. What do I think about the Hack the Box Certified Web Exploitation Expert? So I've been through the material for the Certified Bug Bounty, and I think that is excellent material. I haven't been through all of the material for the Web Exploitation Expert, but it looks like they took a bunch of modules that already exist and shoved it into a course. And I could be wrong, and so don't take this as 100%, but I think they rushed to get something out, and they've just taken a bunch of things that already existed in the academy. So my gut reaction is that it's just a bunch of stuff that already existed, rather than like a proper course. And I have no idea what the exam is like because I've never done it. But I think that the Certified Bug Bounty from Hack the Box, that material is excellent because I've been through that material and I can tell you it's really good. But I don't have a good feeling about the Exploitation Expert, but I haven't done it. So that's my, that's my opinion is the best one. This is my opinion. It's not like a fact, if that makes sense. All right, let's see what else we have. Oh, rooms on TryHackMe for practice. For AppSec. So they used to have the tags. They got rid of the tags recently. Let me sign in. Here we go. Whoops. So the paths are generally really good. So they're a good place to start. But room type challenges. Let's go, hold on, let me go to completed ones. So bookstore is good. This is a good one. Dog Cat's pretty good. I think, can't remember, blog. Wonderland, Ultratech is good. Let me think about the easy ones. Overpass and Source are good. Lian Yu, this guy's a YouTuber. This is not a bad box. This one's okay. Pickle Rick is fun. Oh, the Year of the Rabbit. These ones are quite good. They're quite CTF-y. It's a whole series, but these are good. Tom Ghost is good. It's just a single exploit though. It's like a CV you'll know from the name Tom Ghost. Yeah, so those are a few that I recommend. Skynet's not bad. Ooh. Lazy Admin's okay. Yeah, hopefully that gives you a few that I think are good. But if you're interested in like network pen testing, the networks labs of like Wreath and Hollow, those are excellent. Definitely really, really good. But in terms of like one-off challenges, those are the boxes I think are quite good. Oh, okay. So it's a great question about Kaido above. Oh, sorry, I must have missed it. Where's the Kaido question? Hold up. Let me search. Okay. What do I think about Kaido as a cheap alternative to Burp Suite? I think Kaido is good. I think it's a good tool. And I think in terms of like being able to do stuff that you need to be able to do, so intercepting, fuzzing, and things like that, it's a great tool. I actually, so I did a stream with one of the engineers from Kaido, and I did a video on it, but it was about a year ago now, so I need to definitely revisit the tool. It's nice, pretty stable, built in Rust, which is cool. I'm not a fan of Java. People who watch my streams know that I hate on Java a lot, so I think Burp Suite is slow and clunky, and the UI is, to me, I hate the Burp Suite UI. I find it really difficult to, it's not very modern. And Kaido is, has some things coming up. But in terms of features, obviously is not up there against Burp Suite. So Burp Suite Scanner is one of the really, like, I pay for Burp Suite because I want to use Burp Suite Scanner. That's the reason I pay for Burp Suite. And Kaido as a tool is still quite young, but it is still quite a good product. And I think the more people that use it and support it, the more it's going to grow into something that's really, really amazing. So yeah, I'm a fan of Kaido. I still think it has a long way to go, for sure. But I think it has a lot of very cool features. And even like the AI integration where you can like be like, hey, I've got this request, I've got this header, I don't know what it does, or, these two requests came in and there's like a difference between them. Using the AI support is genius. Like, why would you not use AI to speed up your workflow and try and learn and understand new things? It's great. By default, it's dark. It's like, it's got like orange highlights and then it's quite dark. But yeah, I think dark mode is definitely important. You can see my, if I pull up Burp Suite, oh no, it's updating. Uh-oh. Now my PC is going to crash. I always have everything in dark mode, so we're all good. So we're running over time a little bit. Let me take one more question. In fact, this is a great question to end the session on. Is there more demand in web app versus infra? So I think in terms of pen testing, the world of AppSec is still growing. And I think the world of AppSec is actually a little bit bigger in terms of like if you include AppSec engineering and like secure development and everything else. But this, I'm kind of being very broad with my like AppSec definition there. But I think as organizations, everything is a web app these days. The only thing that isn't a web app is Active Directory. I don't know why, but it should be. But everything is a web app these days. And I think the AppSec field will continue to grow, of course, because we're building more web applications, and most mobile applications are web applications these days as well. So yeah, the field is growing a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean that pen testing is growing so much. It's still growing, but as much. But it means that like AppSec engineering, secure development, and everything else is still growing. And I think infra, especially with cloud, has gotten. I can't say that it's shrunk, but it might have plateaued. Maybe network pen testing is still growing, but maybe not quite at the same rate it was before, and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a booming field. I can say that for sure. 100%. All right. Thank you so much for everybody tuning in. This was a great session. I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, once again, thanks to OWASP Seattle, WiCyS, Michael, Eva, everybody in the chat. It's been great. It's been really, really nice to put this session together. Hopefully we'll be able to do some more. I'm going to be at DEF CON this year. It's my first time at DEF CON in Las Vegas. So if you're at DEF CON, come say hi. If you're at OWASP London in the UK meetup, come and say hi. Otherwise, I stream pretty much every week. Sometimes Heath does my streams, but on Wednesday nights. So feel free to, well, Wednesday night for me, but feel free to tune in. And of course, the links are there. And actually, I can hear my cat howling. So let me pay the cat tax very quickly. Come here, you. Whoa. This is Elfie, one of my cats. She's going a bit crazy now because she's had. There you go. Where you going? Huh? You sit there. Because she's been locked out. But there we go. Cat tax is paid. But yeah, thank you very much everybody for tuning in. Like I say, I will leave the labs open for another hour. And if you don't get a chance to do them, then hit me up on Discord or LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably your best bet, and we'll find a time to get through them. All right. Thanks, everybody.